I won't cause you any trouble. I promise I'll be very obedient. Ethan, can you take me with you? I couldn't help but say with a sob in my voice. Our Emily is so smart and thoughtful. He sighed, lowered his head to cradle my face, and kissed away the tears at the corners of my eyes, trembling slightly. Then our foreheads touched, the moisture blending on the pillow, indistinguishable as to whose it was. The anxiety in my heart grew stronger, and I clenched my fingers until they turned white. He lifted his head and gently patted my back like one would soothe a child. His voice, as if stuck in his throat, struggled to make light of the situation. Try to cry less in the future. You're too young to ruin your eyes with tears. The tears stopped, but the sorrow inside continued to flow. I didn't even know if calling him brother could make him stay, or if calling him Ethan could, or if neither would. Suddenly he said, "Do you want to hear the story of my parents?" Without waiting for my response, he began. My mother's life was actually quite tough. She was the second child at home, with an older brother 4 years her senior and a younger brother 10 years her junior. They favored boys over girls in her family. All the chores fell to my mother, even taking care of the children. They hadn't planned on letting my mother go to school, but during the years when the college entrance exam was reinstated, the country emphasized education. She would carry a small basket to the school nearby and cut pigweed, and while cutting, she'd listen in on classes through the windows. The teachers never chased her away. From the ages of 6 to 8, she used her cleverness to self-study the first and second grade materials, so later the teacher made an exception for her to attend school. She managed her studies without neglecting chores, with teachers persuading her parents and the fact that it didn't cost them anything. In that era, educated people were respected. She was allowed to continue her education. The year my mother was about to take the college entrance exam, which was around '89, there was a flood in the south, ruining vast stretches of farmland and destroying crops overnight. Even her brother lost the money he had for his wedding. They then conspired to sell my mother to the village chief as a junior wife. My mother flatly refused, begging them that she was confident she could get into university and earn a good money for her brother's marriage, but they wouldn't listen. Finally, my mother ran away with no money to her name and found herself at the train station by night. There were street performers and beggars there. My mother, too proud to beg, decided to dance instead. The only dance she learned at school. No one paid her any attention. After dancing all day, she didn't earn enough for even a bottle of water. As she watched the last train about to depart, panicked. At that moment, a man in a military uniform appeared, praising my mother for her beautiful dancing, and then offering to buy her a train ticket in exchange for the impromptu performance. My mother didn't know where she wanted to go, so she asked where he was headed and pretended it was on her way. That year my father had just returned from military service, 23 years old and 5 years older than my mom. But my mother loved to read, and my father had traveled far. They found so much to talk about on that train, feeling like soulmates, that by the time they got off and my mom's deception came to light, he could only praise her intelligence. One was brave and the other kind-hearted, one willing to follow and the other willing to take in. They worked together in factories, set up stalls, and even scavenged. Gradually, they fell in love and decided to get married. But they didn't have household registration papers. My mother suggested they might as well just live together, but my father refused to settle for that. He took his savings to my mother's hometown to obtain her household registration and cut ties with her family. They married openly and even had a modest wedding. Afterwards, my dad drove a taxi for a while, and my mom got a job teaching at a rural elementary school. Life was tough, but also sweet. When I was born, my dad became a police officer, and my mom stayed home to take care of me and run a small business. Life wasn't perfect, but at least there was a steady income. My mom had a difficult delivery with me. It's funny in hindsight, but when my big, strong dad heard my mom's painful cries, he burst into the delivery room without a second thought, unable to be stopped. Holding my mom's hand, he turned to the doctor and pleaded to save the larger life, my mom, even if it meant losing the smaller me. The doctor said the small one was doing just fine and couldn't be disregarded, Ethan's tone was light and humorous, prompting a tearful chuckle from me. He stroked my head, continuing the story. After the safe delivery, my dad took care of my mom through her recovery and then got a vasectomy, saying no more children. In our family, it was the typical kind mother and strict father. Whenever I annoyed my mother as a child, my dad would surely come home from work and give me a beating. But they both loved me deeply. Since I was little, I always thought my dad was cool. I idolized him. Every time I heard about him catching bad guys, I thought my dad was a superhero. As tough as my dad was outside, he was that good to my mom at home. He was the one who handled the finances. He said his unit provided food, so he didn't need to spend money. As long as my dad was home, he did the household chores, teaching me since I was small that a man must be willing to work if he is to keep his family. He would wash my mother's feet, massage her shoulders, and knowing she liked osmanthus, he planted an entire yard full of osmanthus trees. If I had to point out a flaw, it was that my dad never attended my parent-teacher meetings. I took my mother's last name, and the father's information column on forms was always left blank. He never took photos, and they didn't even have a wedding portrait because of poverty. Later, my dad became increasingly busy, sometimes not managing to return home for half a year. The neighbors, always envious, taunted my mom, saying, "My dad must have someone else." I was almost disappointed in my dad, yet my mom still believed he would never cheat on her. Until one year, my dad was shot and carried back home. That's when we vaguely realized his job was not ordinary. My dad recuperated at home for half a year, and during that time, he never directly told me what he did, only took me to learn the difference between peonies and poppies, telling me to remember the appearance of the drug plants and destroy them on sight. That's when I understood what he did. I asked him if it was worth it, and he said, "Someone has to do the dirty work that others don't want to do." I was so influenced by my dad's heroism that I chose public security as my major in university, aiming to walk the same path and become as formidable as he was. After recovering from the injury, he became busy again, rarely coming home. The last time he left, he promised my mom he would be back for her birthday. Unfortunately, on my mom's birthday in the year 2012, we didn't get my dad back, but his ashes in an urn and a first-class merit banner that his superior brought over. My dad died in a drug trafficking bust at the border, fighting to the death against drug dealers, and according to his comrades, his chest had been blown into a honeycomb and his calves were gone. After this operation, the drug dealers went into hiding. Fearing retaliation against his family, my dad had no funeral, his tombstone remained unmarked, and we couldn't even visit the grave during tomb sweeping day. From then on, my mom became despondent, even developing a psychological aversion to the profession, and became overly anxious about my safety. She begged me not to follow in my dad's footsteps, so after graduating from college, within 6 months, I moved here with my mom to start anew. David was my best buddy in college. He guessed a bit about my dad's sacrifice, and you know the rest of the story. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand, suffocatingly intense. I never imagined such a brutal and heroic tale. No wonder I've never seen Aunt Amanda celebrate a birthday. No wonder I've never seen her visit a grave. No wonder she's so pained every month on the 5th, the day that should have been her happiest, but bore the most unacceptable loss. How heartbroken she must have felt when my father, James Wilson, cursed her husband as a short-lived ghost, deserving an early death. I can't even imagine how she's managed these past few years. Uncle died at 46, so Aunt Amanda chose to end her life at the age of 46, not willing to live even a day longer. To her, the loss of her husband wasn't just a storm, but a lifetime of dampness. The things he talked about with David the other day, which I didn't understand before, suddenly became clear. He too will follow in his uncle's footsteps, becoming a narcotics officer. I couldn't bring myself to dissuade him, having no right or reason to do so. No one can forgive for another, nor can anyone stop someone from going far away. Some people have the wind in their blood, destined to run for a lifetime, and as long as you run forward, there will always be those who fall out of step. I once read in a book, "If you long for something, let it go free. If it comes back to you, it's yours. If it doesn't, it was never yours to begin with." It's the same with people, the same with love. I wiped the tears from my face and asked with as calm a voice as I could muster, Ethan, when are you leaving? I don't know. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. How long will you be gone? Will we see each other again? He looked at me silently, not answering. I fought back the tears. I'll wait for you to come back. His eyes began to redden. What if you could never wait long enough, he asked. I firmly said, that won't happen. Fate wouldn't be so cruel. I believe you'll come back. He replied, all right, I'll come back. From then on, every day was a countdown. I tried to keep myself busy to distract from the impending separation. One afternoon, when I was clearing out my high school textbooks, a postcard from a bridal studio fell out. It was given to me when I accompanied a roommate for a photo shoot. The studio owner had slipped it to me. She had wanted me to be a bridal model. I was busy with my studies at the time and had politely declined. I wondered if it was too late to regret that now. Fortunately, when I called, the owner said her invitation still stood. That day, I dragged Ethan along with me. Secretly, I wanted to wear the wedding dress for the one I loved. The bridal gown was beautiful, making my eyes dazzle. The young female owner asked if we wanted to model together, saying we looked well matched. I smiled, shaking my head, saying he didn't like having his picture taken. However long I spent getting styled inside, Ethan waited quietly for me on the couch. Dressed in the intricate and beautiful white wedding dress, with a diamond necklace at my collarbone, my hair gently curled and lazily draping over my shoulders and neck, a shining crown atop my head, and delicate silver high heels on my feet. In the mirror, I looked gracefully beautiful. Stepping out into the starry lights, I felt as if I had entered into the halls of matrimony, as a bride brimming with anticipation to be wed. Hearing my steps, he looked up at me. Our gaze was serene and prolonged, as if even the air around us became still. His deep eyes churned with emotion, then he closed them briefly, reopening to a calm gaze. He said, "You look beautiful." Looking into his eyes, I responded deliberately, "I do." 3 words, seemingly nonsensical and out of the blue. To others I might seem crazy, but I knew he would understand. He paused, then with a smile in his eyes, he said, "Yeah, I do too." I lowered my gaze, hiding the wild thumping of my heart and the indescribable sadness within. During the photo shoot later on, Ethan left for quite some time. The boss lady, who was the photographer, asked, "Are you two a couple?" I thought for a moment, "Not yet." With a grand gesture, she decisively declared, "You will be, don't worry. You two are a perfect match, and love can overcome all obstacles." Love can overcome all obstacles. The path of true love is never smooth, but love embraces the challenges and ultimately triumphs. I am willing to try to believe that. When the photo shoot was nearly over, Ethan came back. He didn't explain where he had been, and I didn't ask. If he wanted me to know, he would have told me himself. Love welcomes challenges, but it seems it's also hard to win against them. David and his girlfriend have broken up. That evening, Ethan, David, his ex-girlfriend, and I all gathered together for dinner. Everything was fine at first, but then, after drinking too much, she took a household register out of her pocket and slammed it on the table. With a trembling voice and a do-or-die determination, she asked, "David, I only have one thing to say today. Will you marry me or not? Just nod and we can register our marriage tomorrow. I don't care about anything else. I'll wait for you, even if it takes 10 or 8 years. I have all the time in the world." David listened without much reaction, simply moving the wine glass away from her. "You're drunk." "David, I'm asking you one last time. Will you marry me or not?" He jokingly looked up. "Wasn't it you who said it was just a fling? Now we're just breaking up, Miss Shen. Why can't you take it?" The emotion at the bottom of her eyes trembled violently, disbelievingly looking at him. Her expression gradually hardened, and she said word by word, "Fine, I, Shen Lichi, am cheap, forcing someone who doesn't want to marry me. I'm the cheap one. There's plenty of men who'd want to marry me. I don't need to cling to you." David's hand beside him clenched tightly, his face pale as paper, but he forced a light tone. "Then I wish you happiness in advance. Who knows, maybe I'll even have the chance to enjoy your wedding." The next second, he got doused with wine. She slammed the cup down on the table, picked up the household register, and left without looking back. A black sedan was waiting in the alley. The driver had been there for a long time. Not until the last trace of the car's sound disappeared. In an outburst, the man began to slap his own face over and over, unable to hide the agony in his eyes. Covering his face with his hands, he bowed his head, crying bitterly. I didn't want to say that, but I can't hold her back. She obviously has better choices and will have a better life in the future. The complexities of the world can't stand scrutiny. Once scrutinized, every matter has its own grievances. The dinner table fell silent, the restrained sobs becoming clearer. A heavy and oppressive atmosphere spread around. Everyone there felt as if they were tightly strangled by an invisible hand. To love, but unable to be together, suddenly, I felt that love is strange, mixed with a dull pain. When love starts, sadness has already been lurking nearby. Separation always comes unexpectedly, catching you off guard. Just the night before, Ethan had promised to accompany me to look at the photos the next day. But upon waking, he told me he had to leave by noon. Our time together was reduced to less than 3 hours, and today was June 22nd. I had planned to use my modeling paycheck to celebrate his birthday, but it had to be earlier now. Ethan never lacked money to spend, but this time I wanted to use my own money. So I went to the market at the eastern city. The rusty old bike was still there, the same cries from the speaker, buying hair, long hair, cutting long braids, high-price recycling, hair for sale. Girl, will you sell your hair? It was the same man cutting hair. Sell. 200, okay? No. 300, that's the top offer. No. Then I'm not buying. He saw I was in a hurry for money and deliberately drove the price down. 300 it is. Because of my high school studies, it was a waste of time to wash long hair, so I had cut it once in between. After 4 years, my hair had only grown a little longer than before. I didn't have time to haggle anymore. 300 was enough. But I had forgotten the merchant's cunningness. The cold scissors moved through my strands. I couldn't see how he was cutting it, only felt a lot of hair being taken down, and my scalp felt cool, making me feel much lighter. He said he would only cut to the chin, but when I looked in the mirror afterward, I found he had cut it right to the root, and I had been forcefully shaved to a buzz cut. The middle-aged man licked his hand and spat, counting out 3 red bills to me. I was too angry to speak. You didn't say you'd cut it this short. He glanced at me sidelong. That's how it's done in our trade. Take the money or leave it. I can give you your hair back if that's better for you. He knew he'd already finished cutting, and the hair was no use to me now. I snatched the money. You despicable man, karma will get you. And I turned and left. At this hour, most of the town's cake shops were still closed. I ran to so many, thinking I wouldn't be able to get one, but finally found an open one. Sister, please, I beg you, please make it quick. An hour later, carrying a freshly made blueberry cake, I went to a nearby flower shop. Shopkeeper, give me a bunch of sunflowers. After buying these, I had only $8.70 left in my pocket. Looking at what I had in my hands, the feeling of satisfaction diluted the hair incident. But Ethan didn't look as happy as I expected when he saw the cake and flowers. He stared at my hair, his lips pressed tightly, and it took him a moment to softly curse. Silly girl. I keenly saw the tears in his eyes, ignoring everything else. I rushed over. Hold on, you can't cry. The old folks say crying before parting brings bad luck. He cleared his throat, and when he looked up again, his eyes were speechless. I breathed a sigh of relief, and as usual, pulled him to put in the candles and light them. The candlelight flickered, perfectly blending with the cheerful sunlight. Ethan Clark, happy birthday. At the same time, he leaned close to whisper something in my ear, but my right ear couldn't hear anything now. I had to look at him blankly. He casually averted his gaze, pretending it was nothing. It's nothing, just wishing you a happy birthday. I believed him. We closed our eyes and made a wish. This year I wished for his safe journey and for us to have many more years together. As usual, he planned to dab the first dab of cream on my forehead, but I dodged and managed to dot it on his brow first. I'm giving all my good luck to you. Give it back to me when you return. He never liked sweets, but this time he forced himself to finish the cake. Before parting, he tousled my hair, surprised. It's a bit prickly. Well, then don't touch it. He suddenly smiled, his lips slightly curled. When I come back, it won't be prickly anymore. He didn't take anything with him when he left, except for that worn-out $10 bill and the sunflowers he had just bought. I stood at the door, watching his and David's backs until they disappeared at the end of the road. Strangely, my heart didn't feel too bad, just suffocated, not knowing what it was. My eyes were sore, but I couldn't cry, leaving only the bitterness in my mouth. Later, I realized this was numbness. Before going to bed that night, I found a set of keys and a bank card under my pillow. Ethan had left the small building to me, along with his savings over the years. Tears filled my eyes unexpectedly. It was like getting caught in acid rain.